So I read the book. I'll start with this. The framing device is completely different, and it's really hard to get your head around it, both because it's not what you expect, and I don't think it's the best part of the book. So the framing device is it starts from this, so the book came out in 95. It's this journalist in 1995, just this ordinary guy who's just broken up or having a fight with his girlfriend, who's sent on some random assignment to some church where supposedly some person was in two places at one time. And you're just like, okay, I understand that two places at one time as a link, but what are we talking about? Also, super weird thing, the guy who's writing it I think he's writing it from the first person. The guy whose point of view we're seeing keeps talking about this fact that he always thought that he had a twin. Apparently there's a link that twins have, at least the book says that, and he always felt like he had this link with a twin, but there's no evidence that he ever had a twin. So there's like 30, 40 pages of this, and you're like, what am I doing here? And the other important thing is this guy he was adopted. I don't even remember what his given name is now, but he was a Borden. So he's a descendant of Borde. That's made clear fairly quickly. Yep. But still, you're like, okay, I get the link, but what's going on here? And then he comes to this house and meets this woman called Kate, who turns out to be Kate Angiers. So in the 90s, they're basically the great-grandchildren of the Borden and Angiers that we know. And Kate basically says, I've brought you here because there's some crazy stuff that happened between our family. What it turns out to be, which is crazy saying it, so the ending of the feud is very different, which I'll get to in a second. But basically the feud kept going for generations afterwards in the book.
Okay.
And in the 70s, the two families tried to reconcile. So again, both the guys are dead at this point.
Yeah.
But the two families who know about the feud, they get together. And this is where Kate, that we see as a child there, and she meets this little boy called Nicky. So she's an Angier, and she plays with one of the Borden kids. And the parents spend all night trying to figure things out. It's never told exactly what they talk about. And then finally they go into their basement where they've got the machine. Basically, in the basement of the Angier mansion, the machine still exists. And they obviously have some fight about using it. And eventually, and I think the Angier patriarch might say that he's going to do it to make a demonstration because clearly the Bordens want to understand this machine. But eventually he chickens out and he throws the boy, Nicky Borden, into the machine. The machine does its thing, and then Nicky's dead. And so Kate has this traumatic memory of, because she wasn't supposed to be there, but she snuck in, has this traumatic memory when she was a child of seeing this little boy die. And her whole family just hid it. She asked people, why didn't we call the police? There was a murder, blah, 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 like what happened? And they basically realized that this little boy is the guy. And that's why he has this twin thing, because he was put into the machine as a child. And this actually takes me to one of the very important... So first difference is the framing device is different, obviously. So you start with this, then you get Borden's diary, just all in one go. Then you get back to the two of them in the present for 10, 20 pages explaining some more stuff. Then you have Angier's diary in full, beginning to end. And then you kind of have so at this point, you get their stories in one go. And the Angier and Borden don't read each other's diaries in the book. You just have these two diaries that exist that these people in the present have read both. And at the end, you kind of have the ending in the present. So I'll explain the ending when I give you another really important thing. In the movie, the machine duplicates you. So it doesn't clone you, because cloning would mean that you've created a copy of you, but that's basically a blank slate. Whereas duplicating means that, like, if we duplicate you now, the other Frosty will have every memory that you have, which means that it's an exact copy. So the whole idea of there being an original is kind of a moot point, because there's no difference between them. Both people have the same soul, the same mind, the same memories, the same experiences, the same feelings. And so that's important because, it's different from a clone. Because I checked, technically a clone would just be a genetic replication, but with none of the memories and stuff like that. Yeah. In the book, the machine doesn't work that way. In the book, it duplicates you. It duplicates your body, but then it transmits the spirit into the new being. And the old one... At first I thought it died, but it doesn't even exactly die. It kind of becomes like an empty husk statue, but it also is petrified. So it doesn't rot or anything. So you basically are left with this petrified body,
right?
Which is hard to dispose of, I guess is the point. So what happened to this what happened to this Nicky is that he was thrown into the machine.
Yeah.
It looked like he died to everyone that saw it because they didn't understand how the machine
But
worked.
there was just another
But
one
actually, they created another Nicky. And this guy who's the main framing character is the new Nicky. But he has this weird connection with the old petrified version of him. And the
Right.
whole ending is him going into this. So it's like an old British mansion where it takes place, of going into this tomb, this crypt that they have. And he finds all of the Angier duplicates. So this, guess we can call them clones, dead clones,
Yeah.
but which are just as the way they were 100 years ago, whatever. And he finds his own duplicate, which basically had been calling to him the whole story. Like this voice in his head was his duplicate that just wanted some sort of closure. And it ends with him finding that, his brother, basically, as he calls it, and getting some sort of relief from that. But so that's the framing device, which I don't. It's very different.
Yeah.
That's the main
It is different,
story, not. And Christopher Priest in his criticism, he obviously doesn't like the fact that they got rid of that, and he says the whole point is supposed to be this feud went beyond their generation and affected the generations after. Which, fair enough, it's interesting, but I definitely think they made a right call in the book of having none of this in it.
Yeah.
So the other big one was the machine works differently. I'll try to get through the others for more quicker. The feud the feud is a much less dramatic. It starts off smaller and then grows in scope. It doesn't start off with someone accidentally killing the other's wife. It actually starts off with and they don't know each other. People say they're friends in the movie, but they're not friends. I've rewatched it carefully. They're people who work together. They never show any indication of liking each other or even respecting each other. So some people say, oh, they were friends. They weren't. They were work colleagues.
Yeah.
In this, they're not even that. They're just rival magicians who actually, they encounter each other a couple of times and exchange words, for example, when they sabotage each other's shows, but they never have a single conversation with each other, which is an important distinction. So they don't know each other. But the feud begins with Borden, as a struggling magician, sees that Angiers is getting some fame by doing seances, so pretending to talk to the dead relatives. Yeah. And Borden has a real ethical problem with that and basically interrupts one of his seances and is like, oh, this is how he's doing this, now he's doing that. In doing so, he pushes over Angier's assistant, who's also his wife, who's pregnant and has a miscarriage because of that. But it's never actually clear. But Borden actually never finds that out. So that's kind of an interesting element about the feud, is the fact that there was a misunderstanding. That then when Angier retaliates, Borden thinks, is he just doing this because of the fact that I sabotage his seance? But he's actually really pissed off because of the fact that his wife had a miscarriage, and they almost years later, like his wife takes years to recover, and like it really impacts them. I won't go through all the detail, but then they have a lot of tit for tat, and then the machine thing happens. So the other big difference is the theme of spiritualism is very big in that one, mostly with the whole use of seances, and then also something I'll tell you about in a minute. The other thing is about the cleared bad guy. So I think we can agree that in the end, Borden is the better guy and Angier is the bad guy, right?
Yeah, they're both bad, but Angier is worse.
But Albert, I don't think is bad at all. I think he's the victim of it all.
Yeah, somewhat, yeah.
And Freddy is, But I think we can agree that the overall villain is Angier.
Yeah, definitely, definitely.
In the book, it's not the case. You go back and forth, like, so because you read, this is a very interesting thing that they decided not to do in the movie. You read all of Borden's diary, and you go, wow, Angier, just like in the movie, he's awful. And like, especially the beginning bit where you're like, why did he escalate it? Just because it seems like a real ego trip, the fact that he decided to start this feud, because Borden, after the seance thing, actually has misgivings, and he goes to apologize, and he sends a letter to Angier apologizing, and then he gets it sent back to him in shreds. And you go, oh yeah, okay. Angier's a real asshole. But then you read Angier's side and you realize that he's dealing with his wife having a miscarriage, so he's in no mood to calm it down. And both of them do at various points try and end the feud, but basically each time they do that, the other one is too angry, so it goes back and forth. But in the end, they both do bad things, but the worst things they do, like the miscarriage, are accidents, whereas Hugh Jackman does really bad stuff on purpose.
Yeah.
Something like the Olivia being sent away, which happens, as I mentioned, she offers to do it.
Yeah.
And Angiers initially says, I don't want to do that, but she insists. So that definitely changes him. And there's nothing about him saying, I don't care. Well, so, and Angiers he never says, I don't care about my wife, because his wife isn't dead. but he never says anything like, I don't care about my baby and stuff. So there's never
Yeah,
that
yeah,
villain turn. And again, the author was really angry about this. He said, you turned my really interesting, both flawed characters into a very cliche villain in Hugh Jackman, which I get when this is your starting point,
yeah,
but that's what you've just got to see as two different works of art, because
yeah. Clearly,
it's
yeah,
a choice
different.
to make it a villain.
Yeah, very different.
Another important one is Borden basically being, even though they do the Albert Freddy thing and they do have differences, rather than having two lives, they very much share the same one. So they both love Sarah and they both love Olivia and they both take part in everything. It's not a
Yeah,
case of them sharing two halves of our lives,
yeah.
but it's that
Okay.
they both live both lives. So so that's an important one. Then the other important one, when Borden writes his diary, he doesn't reveal that he's a twin, but it's very heavily hinted. And in Angier's diary, the theory of the twin is talked about openly from the beginning. He does push back on it, but it's very clear to him about the twin thing. The twin thing isn't this big twist at the end.
Right.
It's very much out there. And that was another thing that Christopher Priest was annoyed about, because like, this wasn't supposed to be the twist. The twist was supposed to be these other things. It's like, great, but Christopher Nolan decided to make it the twist.
Yeah.
And I think you could criticize, the one thing you could criticize in the movie is that surely someone would have thought about the idea of it being twins.
Yeah.
And apparently it was a common thing in magic that twins did actually do this.
Yeah.
But obviously, from Christopher Nolan's point of view, even if you had someone suggest it, that would, you would think of it then and be like, well, that's obviously what it is. So I'm glad they did it differently. But they do have a very long, complicated thing where there's a journalist who looks into the twin theory. This is in Angier's diary, and finds all this proof that it's not true. So he goes off the scent, and then he comes back to him later on and says, oh, actually, it turns out everything was forgeries and he is actually a twin. So Angiers does actually know about the twin thing for sure before the ending, which I'll get to in a second. So this is a fun little one. What would you do if you had that machine and you could duplicate anything?
Duplicate anything.
Yeah, and I'm looking for a very easy answer here.
Well, yeah, I mean, money.
Okay.
Yeah, you
So
would.
there's no mention of that in the movie, and you don't need to, but there is in the book, which is interesting.
Okay.
First of all, you know what would be the problem about duplicating our money now?
Well,
You'd have duplicate serial numbers because you'd be duplicating it.
yeah.
So he does say he says he does it for a bit, but he doesn't want to get into trouble with that.
Yeah.
So what he starts doing is every time he does the duplication, which even though the original isn't alive anymore, it still is you still have two of whatever you've put into the machine. So every time he does it, he puts 3 gold coins in his pocket. So that way the new alive person appears with the gold coins, but the dead one has the gold coins as well. So he does that in a way of basically copying gold, which Tesla apparently gives him a warning about why you shouldn't do it with objects. It's that it's easier to do it with living things.
Okay.
But I thought that was quite an interesting thing about, and I'm actually surprised they didn't put an Easter egg of like someone mentioning that, oh, we should try cloning gold.
Yeah.
But he does it. He does a lot of that. And near the end, he does it loads and loads and loads because he wants to, before he dies, he wants to ensure his family have money forever. So I enjoyed that.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about that actually. An Easter egg could have been a good thing to have in the movie though.
Like maybe, you know what it could, here, sorry, Christopher Nolan, but I think I have it. It would have been one that only people who read the book. It could have been the one time he's about to, maybe even when he tests the machine, he looks into his pocket and there's gold coins.
Yeah.
And maybe he remembers Tesla saying, oh, you never want to have gold coins because it's so-and-so. And that would be just
That would be good. Yeah.
And then, so I've got 2 left. Okay, I'll do this one and then the big one. So Angier's family is completely different. So obviously in this, his wife dies early on and then he has an affair with Olivia. And other than that, he's by himself. But in this, so his wife is his assistant, has a miscarriage, is very angry with him. He then has an affair with Olivia, but leaves his wife in the process. Then cheats on Olivia with someone else, and that's used in their feud. Olivia leaves him, but then but he does reconcile. He has children as well with his wife. But then near the end, he reconciles with his wife, and she knows everything about the cloning and everything, and she's part of it. So he very much has a family life, and that's how obviously he has ancestors and stuff going forward. And again, that makes him more relatable because he's not just this crazy guy acting by himself. He's a man who misses his wife and obviously has done bad things and stuff, but it's obviously a completely different character with that. And then finally, the ending yeah, the fates are, the ending for both of them is completely different. So Angier comes back with a Tesla machine that does a slightly different thing and does a bunch of shows, but there's no indication that he's trying to trap Borden and anything like that. What does happen, however, is that Borden does get very curious. So just like in the movie, he goes down, but rather than it being obviously the water tank isn't a thing in there because they probably have a trapdoor for the dead thing to come through, but it's already dead, so you don't need to drown it or anything.
Yes.
But what happens is he goes downstairs, and just like in the movie, the electricity is sparking and stuff, but it goes completely in overdrive. The room under the stairs gets filled with smoke, and Borden actually thinks that something really bad is happening, so he clicks the off button on the machine. Again, and he's not doing it maliciously. He's just doing it because he thinks the machine is malfunction, whatever, because he's like so overwhelmed by it. But what happens is that turns the machine off mid-trick.
Right.
So what happens, and I was reading this and was like, what? So what happens is he only semi-transports himself, which means that Angier gets split into two.
Whoa.
He has his original self that's still on the stage that is 1/6 lighter than what he is.
Okay.
And also gets very ill very soon and basically dies within a year or two and also has no strength and just gets tired at everything. So he loses it's almost like obviously you would die if this happened in real, but it's just the idea that he's lost a part of himself and now he's just very ill and dies very quickly within maybe a year or two. It's not like it's immediate. But then what he's created, the 1/6 of him, has created basically a ghost of himself.
Okay.
So, and the ghost understands what has happened and doesn't actually go back. Let's call the bigger one the original, and the ghost. And the ghost is translucent. Like basically, in certain ways, he can be seen by people, but not obviously. So he looks very much like a ghost. And what's and the thing is, the ghost goes to the machine to see what happens.
Yeah.
And in Borden's diary, he describes how after he's getting out of the stage from this, he saw Angier's, but he looked transparent and he looked like a ghost. And you're reading it and you're like, wait, what? And then actually, I'll tell you from this point of view. So Borden sees this and gets freaked out, and then says a few weeks later, he found out that Angier had died. Yes, he says that Angier had died. And he's like, okay, that was weird. It was a bit sudden. 7 weeks later. And then sometime after that, he's in his room between a show and he sees the ghost of Angier come at him with a knife and try and kill him. And they have this confrontation, but eventually the ghost just decides not to, throws the knife down and floats through his door. So he's like, what the fuck just happened? But the knife is real.
Yeah.
And then I think that's where, and then he says, nothing was the same. I'd lost a part of myself. I just went on doing magic, but I never did the transporter man again. And then when you read the Angier diary, you understand what happened with the ghost. It was the ghost version that went down to him. And then also the ghost version lived this miserable existence for a few months in London, basically not being able to do anything, but still needing to eat. And then basically said, I'm going to kill Borden as revenge. But then he didn't have the chops for it. But then the Borden that he did that to dies of a heart attack a few days later because he's so traumatized by the whole ghost incident.
Right.
But there's still another Borden that's left alive, and that Borden is the one who writes the last passage in the diary where he basically says, I've lost a part of myself. So he's lost his brother, and he basically just, goes off into the sunset, not in the good way. Just like, I've lost my brother, I can't do my trick anymore. I'm really confused about what happened to Angier, because what actually happened to Angier is that even though he never planned to frame him, that was it. I correct myself. He had planned to do the 100 shows. The idea was that he was going to fake his own death, because obviously he could do that because what's left behind is just a body.
Yeah.
So he could just basically, teleport, duplicate, run off, become Lord Caldlow, which he always was. There's a whole backstory about his brother. Basically, he grew up in this aristocratic family. His brother was the eldest. His brother gave him an allowance until maybe 21 and then basically cut him out completely. He had no involvement with the family. He was cut off. But then his brother dies while he's in Colorado. So he basically comes up to be Lord Cudlow. So that's always been part of his identity. But so his idea is, because Angier is a fake, Robert Angier is a fake name. So his idea was to just kill off Robert Angier and to go back and be the Lord. So he basically does that, but not before the whole splitting happens. So he does that, which is why Borden thinks that he's dead. Then he goes to live as Lord Cuddler or whatever, but gets really, really ill. And after a while, his ghost comes back to him and basically says what happened. And they live out the rest of the main, and they introduce the ghost to everyone, to the wife, to the kids. Whoa. So they're like very transparent about it. They bring the machine. They, no pun intended. They bring the machine to the mansion and install it there, which is why it's there later on. So the main Angier dies from like these horrible like cancers and stuff. But then the end of the Angier diary, which is written by the ghost at this point because it goes beyond Lord Cuddler's death.
Yeah.
Says that the last thing he's gonna do is that he sets up. If this is actually crazy, based how weird everything else is. This ending, he set up the machine. So after he died, Lord Cuddler got put into the tomb, in the family tomb that I mentioned earlier. And so the ghost's idea is that he's going to set up the machine to try and transport himself back into the body of the dead Lord Cuddler, thinking, because the other thing is he thinks he's immortal as a ghost. So he figures either it'll kill him or it'll reunite him into one being.
Okay.
And that's where the diary says, I'm about to do this, and then stops. Then you go to the final chapter, which is the present day thing, which is the whole thing with the guy finding basically his brother in the crypt. And I had a feeling this was going to happen. And then he's in the crypt. There's like a weird, sinister being that's following him around. And he like runs out into the snow and said, because Kate didn't want to come in with him, and says like, look what's coming out of there. And basically it's the ghost of Lord Cuddler Angier, which obviously his thing didn't work. And he's still alive. Well, still exists. And he's just haunting this crypt where all of his duplicate husks live. And he just now is just this, he's just this immortal ghost living in misery. And that's the end of the book.
Wow. I mean, that is very, very different.
I've also spoiled it all for you, but I will tell you this. Even though the beginning and the framing device is weird and I don't love it, when you get into the diaries, it's a page turner. Like, okay. I mean, I'm not a big reader, and I read 400 pages in like less than a week. So if you're intrigued after this, I would recommend it.
It's interesting. It's a very different vibe. It's more like horror.
So he's actually described as horror on Wikipedia as the genre of the book.